Hello, I'm your host, Peter Sawchuk, a professor of adult education and workplace learning at the University of Toronto. You're listening to Thinking Social and Solidarity Economy, an informal discussion series with some of the figures who have contributed to the field. In this episode, I'm speaking with Hye-Su Kuk, assistant professor at the University of Toronto in Canada. An exciting new scholarly voice, here we talk about her approach to studying the relationships between activism, non-governmental organizations, adult learning, and the state. Welcome and hello to our audience out there. This discussion series is meant to be informal, but I want to begin with a few prepared remarks by way of introduction for our guest here today. Having graduated from Penn State University in the United States and now launching her scholarly career, Hye-Su Kuk's work represents fresh thinking that is opening up new pathways of discovery in the area of adult learning, social and solidarity economy. Having published a wide variety of articles on popular education, social movement learning, experiential learning, the current phase of her work builds on her studies of democratic participation in South Korea to explore organizational dynamics of social movements, grassroots initiatives, and the potential for non-formal educational institutions to support progressive social change. She's been recognized with a large number of scholarly awards, both in the USA and in South Korea. She served on the leadership board of the American Association of Adult and Continuing Education's Commission for International Adult Education, and she currently helps lead the Center for Learning, Social Economy and Work at the University of Toronto. There are a range of overlaps. There's a number of overlaps between our work, and I'm very excited to finally have a chance to record a discussion with her for our series. Hi, Sue, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. Thanks for inviting me for this interview.
Yeah.
It's an honor.
Oh, well, I'm pretty excited about it. And I think our students and the wider world, once it goes into the podcast and YouTube world, I think I'll be pretty excited to hear what you have to say. I understand you're joining us from South Korea right now.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So I am visiting the research sites that I did my work in, and there's been some changes, particularly in relation to the publicly funded organizations. There's been a political change, and there's been a lot of cuts. So that's actually affecting the programs. So yeah, I'm looking at how things are changing and potentially to go back to, no, but not potentially, but definitely to go back to Toronto and then get involved with similar organizations.
Oh, very good. Well, that dovetails with my first question. And it's I mean, you can add a little bit, or it might weave together a little bit, because my first question is, I just want to ask you about your approach to this confluence, this nexus of social movements, social economies, and adult learning, and thinking about the study of the relationship between those three components. Can you speak about your area of research and what you see as its main kind of strengths or contributions? Can you just tell us, speak to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So one characteristic of my research in connecting social movements, social economies, and adult learning is that I really prioritize the importance of participatory democracy in like connecting the terms. And that actually stems from my background of growing up in South Korea. So currently South Korea, even though like the Cold War has been ages ago, the remnants are still here because of the geopolitical situation. So politicians still bring up connections with North Korea when they're like trying to attack progressive politicians, and the stance towards labor unions by the general public is really bad, quite bad. And there's my stance, my perspectives is that there are various reasons behind this. But one of the main thing is that the socialist ideas are being represented as authoritarian, and that has been the largest distortion. And that's why I think it's really important to tie in and emphasize the democratic participatory democracy within the social movements, social economies, and socialism. So that is one of my distinct emphasis. And how I tie in this with learning is that this isn't an easy task. So that's where people need to continuously learn and engage with how to manage this democracy. Like democratic practices actually don't blend well with the modern institution of schooling. So what we learned about democracy at schools doesn't really teach us about how to live a democratic life. So I think as the foundational texts and philosophy within adult learning, such as Paulo Freire, and thinking beyond the boundaries of the classroom and into the communities, into the society, is really key to learning participation and democracy. So that has been one of my approaches. And a second characteristic is that when I am looking into this learning, I also emphasize the role of organizations. And that's where the discussion about the state and civil society comes in. So within the education literature, when we are connecting democracy and education, there's been an area of research called citizenship education, citizenship learning.
Right.
But it has tended to flow in like what to teach, what are the competencies. So it's within the boundaries of the classroom. But I think what's been missing in this discourse is the discussion about organizations. When you connect education and into specific organizations like NGOs, grassroots organizations, and labor unions, and so on, it's really, we begin to think about how this education activities could be realized into praxis. And so that has been my key question. And also it allows us to think about, think within the context, like how do we get involved with the state? So yeah, so that has been my approach.
Yeah, well, it's very challenging. I take it, first of all, you lay out the importance of attending to, it seems to me, you lay out the importance of attending to a kind of interinstitutional structures between the state, NGOs, educational institutions, and other areas of community, probably. So that sets a very complex context rather than just simply a single institutional context. And then at the same time, this kind of idea of learning and praxis, and I guess learning in everyday life versus organized learning, is it a challenge, or how do you feel about trying to theorize and then empirically, like you do, empirical work around how to enter and look at and find explanations and insights from people's everyday learning and informal learning primarily, or is it
Yes,
challenging? Yeah.
yes, definitely it's challenging, and I think that's related to the methodological aspect that I have been influenced as well. I've been influenced a lot by Dorothy Smith's institution ethnography. So the characteristic of institution ethnography is to go into how processes actually work. So going into these organizations or institutional contexts, and then really following how things work from Marxist feminist perspective. And the most difficult and challenging part is that many times the activists or people or workers, they take things for granted. So when I ask questions, they would say, like, are you really interested in this, what we actually do every day? And
Right.
so the key task is, that's what I'm interested in, and really following through their work.
Right. So with this a kind of use of that sociology, Dorothy Smith sociology, would you say it lends itself then? It sounds like you would say it lends itself to these kind of although I don't recall her publishing anything or maybe she did, you might know better than I would, on informal learning per se, although I think there might have been one thing, but it does, you're saying it lends itself to studying informal learning in the sense that it has this process focused, contextualized, practice based, the problematic of everyday life as core to it. Am I understanding that right?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think it lends itself very well to studying informal learning. I also recently submitted an article related to institutional ethnography. So when you read works using institutional ethnography, it often opens up how ruling relations work.
Mm.
But sometimes that ends up thinking, oh gosh, our everyday life is shaped by these forces, and like it really reveals how this works, which becomes the foundation for resistance and what we can do. But actually, I actually flip it in my previous work.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually follow through how these relations work within the resistance. So how
Oh,
resistance is organized rather than how ruling relations work. Does that make sense? So
yeah,
that's
yeah, it
how
does.
I used it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't recall, you can inform me on this perhaps. I don't recall that institutional ethnography tradition having a ton of focus on resistance per se. It's more like how people realize the coordination, institutional coordinations of their own lives actively. That's as I understand it. So
Yes.
resistance would be there must be other people writing about resistance from this institutional ethnography, or as I think you mentioned some of your earlier writings more often use the term Marxist feminist standpoint theory. I don't know if you draw a distinction between those two things, but yeah, the study of resistance in that context is, am I correct to say that's a little unique from people using?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
I think so. Because um, it is tricky. And I'm not saying that I've done it perfectly, but so from a Marxist feminist perspective and also from institutional ethnography, the key is not to objectify these activists, and that is a really difficult task. And I remember reading something that Dorothy Smith wrote when she worked worked with feminist groups, but continuously felt that they were being objectified. So I think my previous work was an attempt to maybe overcome this difficulty and explore new potentials, because I think that it's an important aspect. We also need to understand how we organize and how we can organize better. And I think, yeah, this is the way to go.
And are you in a broader, stepping back just a half step in looking at the broader picture, with this with these tools, methodological and conceptual tools, and you started with a kind of trying with the goal of trying to recognize a complex interinstitutional context that is nationally that needs to be thought of as nationally and maybe even regionally, depends, very context specific.
Yeah.
So with those in mind, to go back to your very first set of observations, you're in South Korea now, and you're starting to see some differences. And are there connections between some of those ideas we were just discussing and what you might be sensing you're seeing in terms of change in South Korea today around your topic of participatory democracy and interinstitutional learning and resistance?
Um, I'm still yet observing, but there has been like this investment in the civil society and the organizations by the state has been happening for quite a while. And this phenomenon was just in Seoul City. So the Seoul City mayor drew back the public funding for NGOs. So I think this is an opportunity to see what these public funding has done to the civil society and NGOs, and has it really taken their power out, like made them weaker, or it could be another opportunity for people to come together. So I'm really just looking at how things are going. Yes.
Well, it sounds almost like a natural experiment because
Yeah.
in the sense of I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here again, but my sense was that I used to do a lot of research on the labor movement, and
Mhm.
there used to be a standing kind of debate about whether incorporation in relations to the state, which would primarily in a way take the form of funding agreements. So in the
Yes.
case of NGOs getting funding from the state, and the argument used to be tends to domesticate those
Oh, yes.
social movement organizations or organizations that have social movement potential. And yet here's now you have a natural way to weigh into that debate properly, because now you're saying there's been no withdrawal
Yes.
of support and I guess relationship to the state. So are you predicting, and I know it's just a soft prediction, you're still observing like a proper researcher. I'm going to wait till I observe before I make claims. Would your sense be that there would be a radicalization versus in terms of this general withdrawal of relations with the state and funding in particular?
Radicalization. I'm not sure about radicalization, particularly in terms of like NGOs that particularly focus on education. I think it really depends on what their focus lies in. If it's more of a movement oriented, yeah. Mm. If it's another type of organization that focuses on mobilizing, then it might become more radical.
Right.
But I'm not sure. I'm not sure right now. So still, I'm beginning to do interviews and meet people and hear what they think. So
It's
yeah.
so cool though, because you had done a substantial amount of empirical research in that context
Yes.
several years ago, and now you're able to like further it and cap it off. I had the experience recently of myself of going back to an old project and thinking about reaching out to subjects from way
Oh,
back and doing
oh,
like
way back.
a 10-15 year retrospective on where are they now kind of thing. Anyways,
Oh,
but this is a really cool opportunity though. It would be for anybody to continue, especially having established so many good insights from that core empirical work of yours, and now you can test them again and watch them change in real time. It's pretty exciting.
yes. And actually, the previous design was a comparison with an NGO that received no funding and some NGOs that did receive some funding in different formats. So yeah,
Oh,
it will be an opportunity for me.
perfect longitudinal research design structure there. Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to go on to my next question, although it ties back a little bit, and also you've kind of partially answered it. It was about what are some of the key pieces of work, or scholars, or figures, or research traditions,
Mhm.
or whatever that have inspired you most. And you've mentioned institutional ethnography or a feminist
Yes.
standpoint theory. Are there others, or do you want to speak a little bit more about how perhaps that Dorothy Smith sociology inspired your work in some way, or are there other inspirations that you could share?
I think I already talked about Dorothy Smith's
Yeah.
inspiration. So another would be Eric Olin Wright.
Oh,
Um, yeah, the work on deepening democracy, and particularly about envisioning real utopias.
mm,
Um, as I mentioned before, from the context of South Korea, it sometimes looks quite. I mean, sometimes I lose hope because of the capitalist because capitalism has become so much of a norm, and it's really difficult to envision any kind of utopia.
mm,
But I think the term of real utopias is very interesting, and actually it really ties into the citizens movements that rose after democratization, Korea's democratization in 1987.
Mm.
So there was a split between the labor movements and so-called citizens movements. And now I'm like rethinking this split, and this has been thought a lot by the Korean scholars, but I'm also rethinking because I feel that I can build bridges between perspectives from North America and how it's different in Korea. So yeah.
Well, there's a natural. I remember reading some of your work a couple of years ago now. I don't know if it's 3 or 4 years ago, but and you did a kind of a recap. I remember about the kind of that traditional debate between old and new social
Yeah.
movements. And so does this when you start talking about the split between North Korean labor movements and citizen movements, it just reminded me, does it remind you a little bit of that debate, or is there some relationship between that debate, how to study and think about movements, and the current context, well, I guess relatively current historical context of South Korea?
The South Korean split, it does parallel the new and old social movement debate. The interesting part is that in Korea, this debate is assumed to be so-called quote unquote over.
Oh, who said
Uh,
that? Who said
like all the scholars, like in like maybe not all, but nearly all the scholars who studied social movements in Korea agree that it has moved on to the new social movement.
Mm.
But I don't agree
Oh,
because
okay.
um, yeah, it seems like there's this gap actually between um, people. I think people in North America and who speak English, there's still some people who argue that this is a debatable topic, but I now wonder why this is considered to be over in South Korea.
Right.
Yeah, so that's something that I also want to look deeper into. Mm.
Yeah, that's a fascinating. Well, I don't follow the scholarship from South Korea as closely as I probably should, but it's fascinating this idea that there seems to be a kind of a consensus, a silent or
Yeah.
otherwise consensus, largely, that this isn't this is over. Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Well, I really did like your writing on that. I thought it was a great recap. You did that with a colleague, but anyways, I forget who.
Mhm.
Was it John Holst, maybe?
No, it was Rebecca
Ah,
Tallow.
right. Sorry. Yeah, that was a really informative paper. Maybe I could link it to this
Yeah.
recording at some point, because I think people who listen to you right now will start thinking, oh, I better reread that paper. So very good. I want to ask you, this is just a little bit of an extension of the question we were just on there. Um, there's a whole and you reference, I mean, you make a really great set of contributions and have some really sharp insights on social movement learning theory as it kind of has become formed not that long ago. I mean, I guess I'm getting older, so time doesn't seem like it's been that long ago, but I remember when it wasn't a term, or it was a very new term in
Mm.
2000, I'll say an eight or something. I don't know,
Yeah.
somebody's probably used them earlier, but before people actually started to kind of compose and develop kind of communities of dialogue around this social movement learning question. And can you speak a little bit about the evolution of that, the social movement learning
Mhm.
literature? I mean, in a way that its emergence, only what, 13, 14, 15 years ago, maybe? I'm just guessing.
Yes, yes. That's actually what I wrote about in the article we talked about.
Ah,
So the initial term was coined in 1980 in a book by Paulston, but as you mentioned, it only became widely used in from the late 2000s.
okay.
Yeah, so the reason that it really took off at that time, and the reason is my argument, in the article. I argue, actually, I argue with Rebecca Tallow. We argue that there was this tradition of popular education, and then with the new and old social movement debate and rising from the social movement studies, some adult education scholars began bringing in the new social movement perspective and how they can apply it to adult education. However, there were some pushback against this from the so-called popular education, radical adult education scholars, who argue that the distinction isn't viable. So through this debate, pushback, conflict, this is when the concept of social movement learning really emerges as this common ground for these scholars from two different schools of thought. Yeah.
I might have been one of those old social movement scholars pushing back a little bit because of my studies of the labor movement. And now I'm trying to think that I might have been one of those pushing back people, but I totally get the ideas. Now, I want to extend that one step further, though, because I remember also reading about your work that you more into the area of learning theory, adult learning theory in a way, and your excellent reviews, critical reviews of experiential learning and reflection that you've published, and the idea of whether there can be I guess a universal adult learning theory versus only particularistic or even very localized learning theory. I think it's a fascinating way to open up discussions about learning theory. And can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I have a feeling that some students in my courses that I teach would be really be interested in this type of question too.
Yes, yes. I also do work related to adult learning theories, and that is a continuing question for me about learning theories. And I haven't done any work, like extended work related to it, but my potential ideas is that maybe there could be a new way of thinking about theories. We need some kind of maybe a map, I think. I thought, so because even if a theory is articulated, it's from a specific context and it talks about a specific phenomenon. So the context could make it really particular, embedded to the context, but the phenomenon could be communicated across the context. So I wonder if there could be some kind of a map or tool or protocol to really connect those phenomena, rather than saying, oh, this is transformative learning theory. So somebody's theory. And then some people from different contexts begin to like add on to it. So rather than that, maybe there could be some new way of communicating and thinking of theory is my current idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a secret suspicion. It's not so secret because I've written a little bit about it, but I have a secret suspicion that parallels some of the questions you're raising here, and maybe even this idea of map, that sometimes people's adult learning theorizations, some long-standing ones that everyone would know, some less long-standing ones, and some that are a little bit less on the map in a sense. I have a feeling that lots of adult learning theorists, and I'd be interested in your kind of reaction to this, don't know what level of generality their learning theory is actually born in and meant to contribute to. If we recognize, I don't tend to use the idea of macro, meso, micro levels, but whatever for now. but high universal levels of generality, institutional levels, or particular, I use the term particularistic levels of generality, and then more individualized, almost biographical, unique to an individual levels of generality. And I have a feeling, I just get the suspicion sometimes that great adult learning theorists don't know which level of generality, or if we use the word macro, meso, micro, or some sort of leveling kind of terminology, they don't know really where their theory was born and where it's meant to make its strongest contribution. Does any of that make sense to you in terms of this, this notion you said about we need to have a bit of a mapping exercise or something?
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Right.
I agree. I like the word the level of generality. I
Mm.
think that's different from the micro, meso, macro. It's
Yeah.
definitely different. And this discussion also connects to a new project I'm thinking of as well,
Oh,
because
okay.
I thought of it's a complete different idea. But I realized that when I encounter discussions of decolonization, I'm interested in decolonizing knowledge. So this discussion is really related to decolonizing knowledge because the most cited adult learning theories have been created in the Western world. So, and when I encountered literature of decolonization from the North American context, it really doesn't explain my experience. And that's always a question to me. How can I, like, why is decolonization so fragmented? And so I wonder, maybe rather than decolonizing a specific discipline, like decolonizing sociology, decolonizing education, maybe we can think of how we as adult educators, we have studied the processes of knowledge production, right?
Mm.
Uh, so what can we say about decolonizing knowledge is
Mm.
my question. So
Mm.
I think this like level of generality, I'm interested like in how we have talked about knowledge production. So
Mm.
that would be a level of generality. And there would be several theories beneath it, right? And many, many different dimensions. So yeah, that it reminded me of this idea I recently had, and I don't have an answer yet, but I agree. I like the idea of different levels that you said.
Well, we're gonna have to talk about this more because you got my mind kind of getting in a worrying creation mode here
Oh,
too with it's kind of exciting ideas you're talking about. So we'll have to talk more about that. Luckily, we're colleagues and we might get a chance to. Okay, I want to go on because you almost started to say this because there's things you're thinking about in the future. I want to ask you if there's any other things or particular theories that you kind of have off to the side, in your peripheral vision, looking into the future that you definitely want to get to and explore, maybe use in your research going forward that you haven't really used yet. It could be theory, it could be methodology, it could be anything really, but something that you kind of have in your mind, you maybe haven't got to yet that you might want to use in your research program in the future. Is there any kind of candidates that fit that description?
um, I don't have like specific theories. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like searching and reading, but I do have a long-term project,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I'm really interested in this deepening democracy and how it could become distorted and puts on new meaning in different contexts. And it also relates to social economy. So I'm interested in finding out more about recently democratized countries like the third wave, like
Mm.
Taiwan, the Philippines, or Eastern European countries. And the contexts are there are some similarities and also differences, and how does this distort the meanings, and how do people learn about democracy and like make their own political culture? So that's a project, like long-term project that I am interested in. And
Big.
yeah, yeah, and possibly to capture this diverse spectrum through the concept of citizenship learning.
Citizenship learning, and that has, you said, has a relationship to this social economy, and maybe the term that's used in the title for this series of discussion series, solidarity, social and solidarity economy, and citizenship learning. Those all, you see those as quite intimately related?
Yes, yes, I do. But I know that I do debate whether I should use this word citizenship because it's so kind of tainted. But that's something I would need to keep thinking about. Do you have any suggestions?
No, I've never written about citizenship education, although I remember writing myself about the idea of uh, labor rights extending from in a kind of historical trajectory, extending from guilds and trades in the kind of I guess post-European Enlightenment period, I'll say, slowly a trajectory of expansion from that to industrial unionism, specifically in terms of labor and economic rights, to
Mhm,
expanding towards discussions of community-based unionism, in
mhm,
which the notion, the only time I've ever used the word citizen was that the notion of the citizen starts becoming a subject and an object of community unionism and puts it in a relationship to economic rights. So there is a
mhm,
relationship. I didn't develop it anywhere like probably where you've gone and want to go, but this relationship between citizenship and economy that's the only little thing I've ever tried to write
mm,
about in those terms. But I tried to at least make a case that there's a kind of a historical trajectory
mhm,
of expansion of rights that ultimately end not with particular occupations, labor or working class as a category, but ends with citizenship as the broadest category, and ties it to economic rights. I had no idea where to go with
mhm.
that, and I probably stopped writing about it a little while ago, but I did stop writing about it, I know. But yeah, I don't know if that it fits
Yeah,
at all into the kind of ideas you have, but I like your
definitely.
ideas better.
I think, yeah, it definitely fits into my interest. And did you say community
Unionism.
unionism? Okay.
It was a
I'll,
term. It's not so popular now. Like you early in the discussion, you talked about the kind of coalescence of meaning, scholarly meaning around the idea of social movement learning. That
mhm,
it was written somewhere. I think you said back in the 1980s, but that it began. There was a coalescence around it that made it
mhm.
more meaningful for
Yeah.
a group of scholars. Well, there was a micro version of that with the idea of community unionism. I remember studying that. Yeah,
Oh.
like a smaller, tighter version of emergence, and then people don't seem to talk about it so much anymore. But I now linking it to your work, it seems like it's something that kind of walks that fine line between old and new social movements, maybe citizenship education in relationship to social economy and society and political economy more broadly. Maybe, I don't know. It's tough to say. I haven't kept up with it, but I don't see a lot of writing on community unionism, not as much as I did in,
Mhm,
say, around 2010,
mm,
2005. I don't know, something like
mhm,
that. Yeah.
mhm.
Anyways, enough about me. I want to ask you, because you started to summarize it in the context of this very ambitious, possibly comparative international project on citizenship education in
Yeah.
a particular kind of selective set of countries. Uh, and so I would assume that that is one of the things you think are kind of the most important, or amongst the important emerging issues in studies of social economy, social movements, NGOs, the state. Um, but anywhere in that broad kind of set of kind of almost interdisciplinary field in a way, what are there any other emerging issues that you kind of suspect are really on the doorstep of being very important in that confluence
Yeah.
of topic areas?
Yeah, definitely. So even though I'm interested in different topics, the key question that I keep coming back to is how can we organize, institutionalize, and subvert? Um, so if there's so as we are building power, we would need to organize and potentially engage with the state through some institutions, but how do we maintain the progressive orientations, radical potentials, even when doing this
Mm.
is the key question. I think it's maybe not an emerging issue. It was a traditional, it has been an issue from a long time ago, but I think it's a key issue. Yeah.
right, that's come back and it deserves to be reinvigorated.
Mhm.
Well, see, that's the bonus of having someone like you who kind of bothers to learn the history of debates going back a fair ways, because you, I mean, not to say nothing, everything old is new again, or everything, new is actually been seen before, but you see some of that layer of things that you can bring back and forth. Yeah, it's an important theme though that you just described. Very good. I think this is going to be really helpful to our audience. This is so nice. One important question. I'm at my final question. And it's a kind of one more directed for students. I always
Mm.
try to ask these at the end of our discussions, which is just insights for graduate students in particular who are interested in studying in the area that you specialize in. Do you have any words of advice about how they could get started, and maybe where they can look to maybe someday make a contribution to scholarly literature, possibly? How could they get
Mhm.
started in your area, maybe? Like what should they
Yes.
kind of do?
Mm. Get started. Well, so many things to say.
Oh,
Um, well, getting started is to pick a topic and start reading about the histories and go back to the references. But this is quite straightforward. I think many grad students would know how to do this.
hmm,
But I would like to say students who are interested in this specific topic, um, I mentioned the envisioning real utopia, right?
hmm,
It's easy to get disheartened when you are studying social movements, or if you are if you are interested in social economy, envisioning some utopia. And I think trying to build some foundations for you to encourage yourself,
hmm,
find your community. And that's not just in colleagues or friends or professors or activists, but also books.
hmm.
So compile some books that inspire you, and sometimes it's worth rereading them when you encounter a burnout. So if you feel really, sometimes I remember when I was doing field work, um, it's quite difficult because the change isn't really abrupt.
Hmm.
uh, I'm studying learning and education, and it's a long-term thing. So sometimes there may be some event that discourages you. These things happen, but the key is to not fall down in all these moments, but to find yourself some strength back. And sometimes these people may not be at the vicinity. So maybe some books that have done great work could inspire you. So that would be my advice.
That's great advice, because the kind of emotional energies of
Mhm.
people in graduate students in their program are so important. And they go up and down. Life is very complicated for everyone, especially grad students today. Usually they're holding down jobs and everything else. And this idea of recognizing when you might need to refill the tank of inspiration, that's a really good piece of advice. I'll take that myself as well, because I too get lose a little bit of inspiration and need to kind of get a bit of fire back for a project sometimes. So I think that's really helpful. In fact, I think I, with not very purposefully, but I think I stumble across that very technique from time to time without intending to. The idea of sometimes I read as something not even in my field, which I do like to read for my own enjoyment, but sometimes I'm reading like a biography of a writer, say, and
Mm.
you just get so inspired by their acts of creation,
Mhm.
and you somehow just all of a sudden, for me anyways, I'm sure this is very personal, just fill up the tank of enthusiasm and energy again, even when it was quite low. I
Yeah.
don't know, but this very good words of advice. Well, I'm really grateful. I know you have a lot of writing deadlines, which you mentioned before we started recording, that you need to get on with, but I'm so grateful you took the time, and I think the audience will be too. I'm going to say goodbye, but I hopefully we can pick up on some of these threads, since we are colleagues. And when you're back from Seoul and back from South Korea, then and maybe once our term gets stabilized, we can
Mhm.
grab a coffee or something. Yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Okay. Well, I'll let you go and be well. Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
This has been another episode of Thinking Social and Solidarity Economy. Please consider exploring our other episodes in this series, or take a look at episodes in our other series entitled Work, Learning, and Social Change. While you're at it, and if you're watching this on YouTube, keep up to date on the latest material by hitting that subscribe button.